Okay, so welcome everybody. I've got 5 o'clock, so I'd like to call to order the meeting. Attendance, Sean Callan. Julie Chetney.
Here.
Tom Chiappa.
Here.
Dave Crisfilli. Jim McKenzie is here. Kristen Norfleet. Absent. Sean Onmock.
Here.
Thank you. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so floor to the public. We do have one person signed up before we call. Just to reiterate the public session, the Board of Education welcomes public comment using the following guidelines. Each speaker who signed up is permitted 3 minutes for their comments. Speakers may not yield the remaining time to others. All comments must be directed to the board president. The board will listen to comments and input, but not necessarily debate or discuss items. Operational matters will be directed to the school board administration for handling. The board is not permitted to address personal or individual student matters in open session. The board will limit repetitive well, there's only one person. The board president has the authority to end the speaker's comments or close public comment as appropriate. Any written correspondence or letters may be directed to the board clerk for distribution to the board. The board expects proper decorum at all times, and all speakers should state their full name and address. So, Brandy Norton.
I'm short, so. Brandy Norton, 1082 Middle Road. I just am coming to say thank you to the board, to the school, to Nancy, to the custodial staff. On July 2nd, we were really lucky enough to have the #2 drum corps in the world practice at our facility. It was an amazing day. It started at 4 a.m. It ended at about 10:30 at night. We had kids come. We had one kid show up at 9 o'clock, and he was ready to go, and the drum corps was asleep, but he just ran around all day and was watching. Our percussion students came and were just in awe, and it was amazing to see what our kids can do with support, and it was just great. It was truly a program-changing experience for some of our students. We had a kid show up and then say, yeah, I want to do that. Where do I sign up? So it was great. So I just want to say thank you as a parent, as an alumni, as a taxpayer. It was great. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for so many of our kids, for our program, for our Band Parents Association. It was just great. So I just want to come and say thank you. Thank you to all of you who made it happen. It was wonderful. If you've not seen the pictures, go on the pictures. We also made the Boston Crusaders, that's who came, I don't know if I said that. Every week they do a weekly video, and we made the video. Some of our kids, and they were here. They were so appreciative of the space, of the field, of just everything. So I just wanted to come and say thank you. I know that Mr. Ciesla sent an email, so hopefully you'll get to see that. But if you haven't seen the pictures, please go on our Facebook page and see those. And just thank you. I can't say thank you enough. It really was wonderful for our program, and we start full speed ahead tonight, and the kids are excited. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so we are on to the superintendent's report. I think, Nancy, you're going to help with this because we're going to have a presentation from King and King.
Yes, we have tonight representing King and King, Craig Daly, Carrie Tiroli, Amy Daly, and Peter Marcinison from Construction Associates. So Craig, you want to come up?
Hello, and welcome and congratulations to our new members joining us. The format for tonight is really to bring up where we're at, how we got here, and next steps, hopefully to bring the board up to date. I will kind of allude to the end that we really, we do an overview in this presentation. The intent is we really would like to set up a board workshop where we can get into all the details of the project and answer any detailed questions any member may have to just get a better understanding of what the project scope entailed. Okay. right, so this project, in its infancy, it actually started planning in 2012. It started with a lot of master planning for athletic, field work, things like that throughout the project, as well as it's fed by our building condition survey, which is an instrument we use every 5 years to evaluate the condition of the facilities. Now, building condition survey doesn't take into effect a lot of the program needs. So if the teachers need a new science room or those types of things, unless those spaces are deemed dilapidated, they've exceeded their useful life, and they require renovations, they usually don't make the building condition survey, but they do bring up on the district's long-range capital plan. So a lot of that information, starting in 2012, kind of led to this project that was voted on in 2018. So it was always from the start to be a multi-phase project. And this is one of those details that a board workshop would help. There's a lot of things on the state ed and the financing end of the project that in order to maximize the state aid portion, we had to do 3 phases on the main campus. So when I say campus, I'm talking about the high school Layton facility right here. Because of how they finance site work, site reconstruction work, it's a smaller portion of what they fund for buildings. So that's why we have to go like in a 5-year cycle for any site work that we do, because we're trying to maximize that aid. And again, this is something we can get into in-depth understanding of school finances for capital projects. So we have the 5 phases. The first one is the middle school pool dehumidification and lighting system. And then the phase 2 was the high school stadium, middle school track and boiler room, as well as some other details you'll see itemized here. Phase 3 was actually broken up into two phases because the scope and magnitude of that work was pretty large. 3A, which is the elementary school infrastructure work, and then 3B was the middle school reconstruction. And then to be done is the phase 4 and 5, which is, again, the main campus site development work. We're going to have some discussions on priorities and what next steps look like for those 2 phases. So again, scope, phase 1, this was actually originally part of the middle school reconstruction work, which was not scheduled to what is currently the phase 3B timeframe. But there was issues with the dehumidification mechanical systems, and it was also an opportunity to upgrade the lighting that was in there. If you recall, the lighting at the high school here has those beautiful longitudinal tubes, high definition lighting that's in there. It's the similar system, but it's an LED type, so there's better energy savings, and the light quality is more controllable and will last longer. That phase is complete. Phase 2, the middle school boiler and track reconstruction. Again, those portions of work were supposed to be packaged with the middle school reconstruction work. But if you're familiar with the track, there were some conditions, safety issues and concerns that were raised, so we did the resurfacing of the track as part of the phase 2, and we also did the boiler system as part of the phase 2 work, because that was getting to the point of being more trouble for maintenance. We also did the high school locker room reconstructions, the band music reconstruction, and some other infrastructure mechanical upgrades, as well as like toilet room updates, like by the auditorium. We redid the lobby. We also did the bathrooms in that area, making them more accessible, but also updating them. And then, of course, we did the stadium and artificial turf and associated team rooms, press box, concessions, toilet facility building, and bleacher systems. At Layton, we did the athletic wing renovations. We updated the locker rooms. We provided referee locker rooms. There were some mechanical system upgrades as well as other infrastructure in those portions of the building. And again, this phase is complete. Phase 3A is the elementary school. So Riley, Minetto, Fitzhugh, and Kingsford Park infrastructure work. We did a lot of masonry restoration at the 2 older buildings, the 2 park buildings, as well as floor finishes, interior finishes, and upgrades to some of the other systems. If you've been in the Fitzhugh or Kingsford Park, you know that there's issues with windows and moisture coming into the building. The masonry restoration was like the first step to addressing those issues. You have a lot of plaster-type finishes on the interior that have been reconstructed, as well as floor finishes and ceiling system replacements. And that is scheduled for completion the fall of this year. So we'll be wrapping that up. They'll be doing their final cost reports by December of '23. Phase 3B is the middle school reconstruction. Again, we're replacing all the exterior curtain wall systems, the windows, mechanical systems that serve those perimeter classrooms are being updated and replaced. A lot of reconstruction to those rooms, a lot of modifications to how they're laid out and how they're used, so they'll be brand-new rooms. Again, I suggest a tour at some point. I know Mr. Chapa is always making himself available to go over there. It's really something to see those interior partitions down and how open those spaces are and how clean they've been constructed. So it's worth a trip at some point. And then mechanical and control system updates. And again, this is scheduled for completion in fall of '24, and we would do the final cost reporting to SED by December of '24. Again, all those phases are on schedule. This is kind of a sample rendering that we did of the exterior. If you know now, it's kind of that dark bronze panel system that's on the exterior of the building. It's been very bleached out by sun and age and things like that. So there'll be a new window system or new system installed with a different color, a lighter color that will hold up. There's some sun shading to help with maximizing interior cooling and things like that. And then to the right is kind of what we do as a finish board to give you an idea of what wall finishes, floor finishes, and the color palette of the building. The scope of Phase 4, as originally planned, is the baseball, softball field reconstruction, and it was designed for artificial turf systems, accessibility to the fields, perimeter fencing replacements, and the Liberty Lot reconstruction and retaining wall reconstruction. Something to keep in mind if you're familiar with some of the things that we've encountered at the old Wilbur Field, those two practice fields, we discovered that, of course, we were on a dump and there were some hazardous materials that we had to go through an additional kind of a mini project that was funded as an emergency project for the replacement or the removal of those hazardous materials. That is throughout the campus. So whenever anything is done on the campus, it needs to be a consideration of what we're doing site development-wise because there will be an implication of contact with those materials. And then Phase 5, Buck Boulevard reconstruction Part 2. Again, the whole Buck Boulevard was supposed to be part of Phase 5, but as we developed the stadium complex, we've ran into issues in that road and the degradation of it, so we replaced and reconstructed half of it with improved drainage. This would replace the other part, the rest of it. Playground replacements, relocations, Layton parking lot reconstruction, basketball and tennis court reconstructions, and drainage improvements and site signage, just providing some wayfinding throughout the campus facility so people can find where they need to go. Our budget, it's broken down by the phases, so if you look at your, after the description is our pre-rush budget that was established back in 2016-17 in preparation of the 2018 vote. And then you see on the right side what we've expended or have remaining budget. What I want to draw your attention to is of the $63.1 million authorization that the voters approved. If we were to do all the work, we're at about $72 million. Based on overages on Phase 2 and 3A, as well as a little bit on 3B. So basically, your available funds of that 63.1 is $12,478,000, and you can see in kind of the blue italics, the budget values for the Phase 4 and 5 are 11.7 and $10 million each. So that's where the decision prioritization discussion needs to be had. Some frequently asked questions is like, okay, explain to me how this budget has seen some overages on that. Well, we ran into 2019 or the 2020 year with COVID. That is timed perfectly with when we were putting the project out to bid. And I think a lot of the overages you see in that project were due primarily to unknowns. We didn't know if we were going to have manpower. We don't know if we're going to have material. We don't know what the state is going to do for shutting down and what it would do to schedules for trying to perform construction. Also, escalation inflation. I think we all know inflation's been an issue over the past couple of years. It is affecting the price of construction work. And we are having limitations in utilizing the apprenticeship program, especially for site and general construction contracts. The apprenticeship program is not necessarily adding the money to the project or the cost to the project. What it does is it limits competition. So I'll give you an example. A general contractor is really more of a vendor. Very few general contractors now have a lot of their own crews, their own carpenters, concrete work. They basically get prices from all these organizations and put a bid together and submit it. That apprenticeship program limits if they can participate in that program or participate in it, a bid for this district. So you get one or two contractors that can actually bid a SWIGO work where you could have 6, 8 in some instances. Schedule duration. The original schedule for this work, as I mentioned earlier, was phased out for 15 years. That allows a 5-year recoup of the maximum cost allowance for the incidental, which feeds the site work budget line. So that's kind of, people think, why is this taking so many phases to get through? Well, it was always designed that way. Future budget planning. Again, what we would like to do in a workshop setting is review the alternates that were bid but not selected as part of phases 2 and 3. We also want to prioritize the phase 4 and 5 scope items. We would then update the budget based on the district priorities. And then again, the hazardous soil conditions would now be part of that costing process with anything we do in phase 4 and 5. Overall schedule, phase 1 is complete, phase 2 is complete. We talked about 3A and 3B. The completion for phase 4 is estimated at fall of '27, as well as phase 5 would be fall of '32. You can see those 5 years. This is kind of what we do. Our construction management firm, Construction Associates, puts together during construction a phasing plan. We work with the district to kind of create how we're going to approach the construction work at the middle school. And it's maybe a little hard to see on this, but you might see it on your handouts or the electronic copy. We were basically afforded a 2-story wing, 4 classrooms at a time. So that allows us to go in, attack those areas, protect them from access to kids and that type of thing, complete the work, and then move on to the next bank of 4 classrooms or 2 stories, 8 classrooms basically. And that kind of lays out the timeline for that. You can see there's the upper level. Again, a lot of the work has been focused on the perimeter because that's where most of the reconstruction work for the exterior wall systems, window systems, is affecting your mechanical systems and associated work. Other work that we're doing too, to keep in mind that we're not just focusing on the capital work. We also have an energy performance project that's ongoing. As you can see in here, the lights have been replaced in this portion as kind of a test case to see what it would be like. If you could kind of look over here where the pendant lighting is, you can see there's quite a difference in light quality of this space. So this will be, I think, a nice change for the district. The school-based healthcare center that we're putting in over at Layton. And those drawings are being put together and submitted to SED, and we hope to have that up and running late winter, early spring. We're also doing continued smart schools planning. So you've submitted one smart school plan that's been approved financially by the state of Ed. We have drawings for that that are going in for approval for the capital portion of that. And then there's also phase 2, which is in design, which picks up, I think, some remaining issues that were left by items not talked about in the phase 1, excuse me. Also, we continue the long-range planning. That never stops, so we're always updating that long-range plan. We just completed a building condition survey, so that's been updated in that planning instrument. And then there's also discussions for future capital project planning. So every time you do a project, at the end of that project, you have the options of using that fund balance or that balance of money to straight line of your debt service to keep that, to minimize the impact to your local share for doing a capital project. So we're getting to that point with some of the projects. We need to start looking at future capital. So next steps, again, I mentioned review and prioritization of the remaining work, review of the budget and allocation of the remaining funds for that work, and as well as the future project planning, really digging into the long-range plan and what a future capital project would look like. Questions?
Question. What percentage of the budget increase would you say is because of inflation, the impact from COVID, people being paid more, things like that, as opposed to work order changes, abatement issues, things like that?
I would have to get back to you on that. I could get that information because we track it.
Okay.
Craig, the only thing I was going to look at is Phase 4 shows about $1 million under budget, right? And everything else is over budget. I'm assuming because that's the scope of the work changed because what we accomplished earlier in Phase 1 and Phase 2, over that one, over Phase 4, which was the campus here.
Yes, there was some scope additional work. A lot of it was based on, I'll give you an example. We had the music classrooms as part of the reconstruction work. We knew we were going to do that. When our acoustical engineer came in, they noted that you had your orchestra utilizing a room that would be better for the band, and you had the band utilizing a room that was better suited for the orchestra. So those rooms actually got swapped, and that was kind of had additional costs associated with it as far as the design of those spaces. It has to deal with the volume of space and the instruments and how those rooms are properly used. So there were some things like that that were part of that process that added to the cost.
But I was speaking about it being under budget by $1 million in Phase 4 when everything else is projected over.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
missed that part.
no, so that's what I was saying, because is that because we did the earlier work on, say, Buck Boulevard? And so that went up to earlier
Correct.
phases, which would have been in that phase. So that
Correct.
changed that?
Our engineer, our site engineer, Appel Osborne, went through and actually reevaluated to see. We weren't supposed to touch Wilbur Fields until a later phase, and that even wasn't even supposed to be the magnitude of the work that we ran into with the floodplain development, as well as the discovered soil conditions that we had there. So yeah, those projects got kind of pushed up and added to the cost of the Phase 2 and minimized the cost of the Phase 4. Yes,
Gotcha.
thank you. Apologize for that.
So you mentioned the soil remediation, we're all well aware of that. You mentioned there additional costs for floodplain. So can you please talk a little bit about that?
So you'd be scratching my memory because I tried to wash that out. We had a floodplain design that needed to be reviewed by FEMA and approved, and we worked in collaboration with the city and how the water management system was being dealt with. So the system we had, we actually, Wilbur Field is actually depressed additional depth to accommodate for more surface rainwater and retention on campus instead of it running off to adjacent spaces or being incurred into the existing storm line system, which still the city's looking to, correct that down the road. Those additional costs, I believe, Nancy, are not impacting the capital project, so that money didn't come out of it. It was a separate emergency fund that dealt with the financial impact of that.
If I may, Mr. McKenzie, one of the big items with regards to FEMA was when they looked at our plans. I'm sorry, I apologize. When they looked at our plans, they did not accept the calculations for all the underground storage that we have at the field and at the parking lot. They said you cannot count that in as part of your floodplain. That's why we had to change all the elevations, or a lot of the elevations, out into the old Wilbur Field. So if you remember back when we started the construction, underneath the entire field, the turf field, we We've got those orange domes that act as a retainage basin, the same thing out in the parking lot. They said no go on that, no calculations can be accepted for that, it all has to be in the field. Okay.
So I guess when you mentioned workshop, based on your timetable for the next phase or phases, was as a member of the last facilities committee, we spoke of the ability to possibly roll the rest of the work into one phase or separate them into two, depending on what they are, the scope of the project. When would you like to have this workshop so we can get it scheduled and timed?
I'm thinking within the next month or so, when the board settles in, and maybe before school starts, or maybe a little after school starts, so when things quiet down a little bit. We have a little bit of time to consider that, but we definitely want to have those discussions early so we can get the board's involvement and, direction.
So before the next, we'll say before the next school year, so next 3 meetings, Nancy, if we can kind of put a pin on that one. And as part of that workshop, will you be bringing us your thoughts and recommendations about which parts of the project are most critical in your opinion, based on infrastructure, ADA compliance, whatever that might be?
We can definitely provide that information from our aspect and what we see from life safety, code-related issues and things like that. Yep, yep.
And I was going to say, we get the information with the BCS as well to show what we're covering when we look at those items, we'll look at them relative to the BCS as well to see if they fall in. They may or may not fall into that.
Correct. I think what's important, though, to look at is you have the BCS work, which we just finalized, that feeds the long-range capital facilities plan, which I believe Nancy distributed to everybody, which is to be part of the discussion. We had to be careful when we look at the capital project to say, well, there's something on the BCS that, is a high priority. You can't necessarily add that to the capital project if it's not in the language, that's all.
Right, no, I don't want to go that way
Okay.
with it, the other way. What's in the plan that's would be on the BCS, looking that way.
Okay, in
Yes.
transition?
Yeah.
Okay,
Making sure.
yep. Great, thank you.
All right, so next on the agenda is a discussion, speaking to the school resource officer memorandum of understanding. We have here Chief Katie and Captain Waters, in case we have any questions, they can help participate in the discussion. I don't know, Nancy, would you want to give a history, or I can?
Okay. So we had been with the Oswego Police Department using an SRO for quite some time. Then we had changed in 2021-22 to the Sheriff's Department. And that program they were trying to build, they were in other school districts. And the cost of an SRO through the Sheriff's Department was less than what we were going to be charged from the Oswego Police Department. After 2 years with the Sheriff's Department, they had some staffing problems. They had some issues in terms of providing an officer when an officer had been out on sick leave, or we also had problems with them moving from one school to another, because once they got into the middle school or the high school, that's where they wanted to stay. During that time, we continued to use OPD for all of our overtime work, for security, for our dances, and all of those opportunities, which we're very grateful for. And now we are considering, and the board is to consider going back to the Oswego Police Department for a new agreement for an SRO program going forward.
So as a clarification, to me, fundamentally, two of the biggest shifts will be we're going to be interacting more locally, right, with our local police force. From a financial or practical standpoint, the difference is in the old with the sheriff, we had 2 SROs. One was at the high school, and the other one is the middle school. And the current MOU that has been presented by OPD is for 2 at the high school, 1 at the middle school, and then 1 officer who will be floating amongst the 5 elementary schools. So,
In substance, yes. So after discussions with Dr. Calvin before he left, and Nancy and Amanda Caldwell, we kind of looked at the program overall. I don't think it's any secret there are issues here at the high school. There's been some issues in the cafeteria. So from what we've been told, a lot of the SRO's time is spent in the cafeteria during lunch hours. There's also a huge uptick in mental health calls, not just here in the school, but overall our department. We're up over 51% mental health calls. They're very labor intensive. When we have to transport somebody to the hospital, generally we have to wait with them until they're admitted and brought into a secure area. Juveniles bring a whole different dynamic to that. So we feel that the 2 officers at this school, for the size of it and the amount of students and the amount of faculty, will help to soothe some of those issues in the lunchroom during the day, and it'll also allow us to have an officer walking through the school interacting with the students and staff. If for some reason one of the officers has to leave here, there's still an officer on site as compared to before. If the officer had to leave, the SRO had to leave, there's nobody on site at the school district. I brought the floater idea up to the former administration, mainly because we wanted to have interactions with elementary school. We have great interaction now with the DARE program and Officer Grover, but we wanted to have more interaction. We spend a lot of time, our day shift officers, going to the different elementary schools, handling complaints that are called in there, and they're very labor intensive. So our hope is that the floating SRO will be able to help ease some of those issues at the elementary schools. We'll be able to cover if there's an officer that needs time off or is at training, can't cover one of the schools, can go to the middle school, can supplement at the high school, and can help at the elementary school. So that's why we brought up the idea of the floater. Of the 4 officers, 3 of them will be special patrol officers, which is what the civil service designation is for a school resource officer. Some former police officers have to take a civil service test. There's different rules in the civil service system for that, and that's what the designation is. So I had a couple of questions about what is a special police officer, or I'm sorry, special patrol officer. That's just the civil service designation for the test. There will be school resource officers here. Our plan is to have a full-time police officer from the Oswego Police Department that hasn't retired, that is still on the job here at the high school to provide some continuity. There's been some concerns raised over continuity the last couple of years. That officer will be here, will be working here, and will kind of be the mainstay of the SRO program. So I talked with Dr. McKenzie this morning. He had several questions. I know a lot of you have questions, so please, the floor is yours.
With your involvement, will we, and once you're in our school community, will we be getting feedback and input for our overall safety plan from the Oswego Police Department? Is that part of the whole plan?
Sure, it's something we can discuss. We had talks were kind of hot and heavy, and then they've died down a little bit. I know that you're in a search for a new superintendent, but it's definitely something we can talk about, and it's not an issue to do that.
just jump in there to piggyback off that. Nancy, I believe you're involved directly with our safety program as a whole and putting that together. I think that's coming up soon. Could you talk a little bit about how that's constructed? Did we talk with the sheriff during the last time?
Was formally, that has been transferred to Amanda Caldwell.
Okay.
The security, but I can speak to it. When I was doing it, we would get all of the safety plans, we would review them, they would be sent out to all of the schools, reviewed with the principals, names would be changed on who's on the committees and things like that. And we would have to send all of our reports to the police department, to the fire department, and also to state ed, so that they could all be reviewed, and so that the police department and fire department would have, be familiar with our district emergency plans and the school-based plans.
Great, thank you.
And also, we have, state and federal partners that can assist us with threat assessment and planning, so we can have them look at the plans also.
Bill, I have a couple questions for you. First, can you clarify, you just said that 3 special patrol officers, which you described as being a civil service designation, and then 1 on-the-job police officer?
Right.
So do I understand there what you're saying is that of the 2 who were assigned to the high school, one of them would be an active duty police officer and the second would be the civil service officer that you've described?
Correct. The three special patrol officers that they're all will be retired or are retiring police officers that have 20+ years of experience. So, but yes, one of them will be a full-time police officer.
Okay. And when I was reading through the contract documents, I noticed that for, I'm going to call them extracurricular activities, where you would want a presence from the SRO, that the SRO is supposed to be notified of them with as much notice as possible, but that if the SRO can't be there, then the police department would supply somebody at an overtime rate being charged on top of the contract. Can you explain that a little bit for me?
Right. So that's basically what we do now is the school district pays an overtime rate when we cover any of these events. So the hope is that the SROs, and the expectation will be that the SROs are working these events that the school district deems necessary, whether it's a football game or a dance or whatever. We want the SROs to be at that event. But in the off chance that the 4 of them can't be at that event, we'll cover that at an overtime rate from the police department. We'll have somebody from the police department cover that event.
Okay, so from a financial perspective, if the SRO is covering it, they have a certain number of hours that are contemplated within the contract that are part of the contract that would not be billed over and above. But if they can't cover it and it's an overtime officer, that is over and above, correct?
Right. Yep, and that's billed on a monthly basis like we do now. But that's something we're still in conversation about. We've discussed either trying to shift the SRO's schedule or paying them compensation for working that, but there hasn't been a set decision made on that yet.
Okay, and then another section of the contract talks about in the incidents where an SRO is, whether out sick or some sort of a absence, under the plan, I'm going to use the high school as an example with 2 officers at the high school. If one of those officers is out for anything more than a day, at what point do you substitute somebody in to be the second officer versus waiting for the second regular
that's why
assigned to come back?
yeah, right, and that's why we have the floater, the 4th officer, to cover those absences, have somebody at the school, and then if it's going to be a long-term absence, we'll have to discuss either replacing that position, if that officer can't come back, or maybe us from the police department covering it. We'll have to talk about that as we move forward.
Okay, and then there was also a section in the contract that talked about the district funding equipment that officers need, ranging from the first set of uniforms to the weaponry equipment.
Yep.
That's not equipment that's already owned in use by the police department. It has to be purchased in addition.
Correct. It's
And that-
over and above what we currently have, and I believe the sheriff's department contract was the same thing. You purchased. So I don't know what that agreement was with their equipment. They use similar stuff, but we'll have to purchase it. But with that said, if we hire Officer X this year and we outfit him with all the equipment, and he or she doesn't come back next year, that equipment can be reused for the next officer. We don't have to buy new equipment every time there's a new officer, unless it's shirts or pants,
Right.
things like that.
Okay, I understand. Thanks, Phil.
Yep.
To piggyback up on you, Chris, the fact that with the sheriff, we did not have the sheriff covering those extracurriculars, that we were already paying the time and a half to OPD to do that. So the fact that we would have an SRO, one of 4 SROs available for some of these events, and the off chance we don't have them, we were going to be paying the same we paid at every event anyway. From that aspect, and only that aspect, it may be a cost savings just for the extracurricular overall not, but for the cost for that aspect.
Yeah, I just had a question of the overall cost. It's 70,000 plus the 7.65% additional
Okay.
cost, so about 75,000
Right.
per officer. And we have 4, so approximately 300,000. And where were we, Nancy, relative to budget on that? Will this be something we're going to add on to, or how will that sit?
We would have to do a budget transfer to increase that line. At the time the budget was created, I was in the understanding that we were only going to have 3 officers. So if we were to go to 4, I would have to add money to that line.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that got lost in translation somewhere. That was when the mayor and I met with Dr. Calvin. That was the discussion, was to have 4 officers, and the general idea of, you know, why we wanted to do that. So I understand that, you know, there is a bit of a cost difference, but we have to look at the reality of it right now, let alone trying to hire new police officers, trying to get retirees to want to come into you know, back into the policing environment. We have to kind of make the job, the salary helps to attract better candidates.
Oh, sure. I have no question with that. I just wasn't sure where we were to where we are now.
Gotcha.
The other question I had was applying for the Department of Justice for the program and the grant. You'd apply for the grant?
Yep.
Is that how that would
Yep.
work?
So we have a grant writer, an officer that writes grants. He's already looking at it. It should open up in September, the federal grant. There's also legislation in New York State that they're going to have grant money available also. It's not out there yet, but as soon as that comes up, we'll apply for both.
Right. So if that grant came in, it would offset that cost overall?
Yes.
Is that how that would work? Okay.
Yep.
So we just need to cover it in lieu of no grant?
Yep.
Okay.
With the hope that we get the grant.
Yes. Always on the plus side.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
You mentioned the full-time officer that's going to be the SRO. Is it safe to say that that officer would be kind of the lead of the 4, or is it not it's not like a chain of command necessarily?
There'll be a sergeant that oversees all 4 of them.
Okay.
But I would consider the full-time officer that's here as the main point of contact. They'll have primary responsibility for the caseload, reports that need to be done, follow-up investigations, things of that nature.
And how does that look? I mean, for someone who's, I'm really not sure, who are they accountable to? Like you just said, there's a sergeant who's going to oversee. Are they
Yeah,
meeting with?
there's a hierarchy. There's that would fall on our administrative side of things. There's a captain that oversees the
Okay.
administrative division, and then there's a sergeant that oversees our training, our
Okay.
neighborhood engagement, and they'll,
I mean, in reading the document, it was pretty extensive as far as the job duties of this person.
right, yeah,
So, I mean,
yeah,
it was a lot.
yeah. No, there's somebody
It's-
that'll directly oversee
Yeah, it was
their
very thorough.
caseload.
Okay, thanks.
So what's our timeline like moving?
If we have enough time here, that based on our discussion, if we're comfortable with it, that we would put it on the agenda for our next meeting, August 1st, at which point, if there's particular language or things people would like to debate, then we can go through that process. But we would really like to get it no later than August 1st, so that Chief Gady can be hiring people and have uniforms and all of the things that need to be purchased. We have everything in place for day one, or actually minus day one, because one of the things, maybe you could speak to it a little bit, these officers will also be trained in some things that are very relevant to school, like crisis prevention. Right? So,
Yep, so there's a basic school resource officer school training that'll be offered at the end of August that all 4 of the officers we're going to hire will be going to. We're right now in the middle of, we just won a second round of a grant for crisis intervention training through the federal government. All these school resource officers will be put through that training also. We have in-service training over and above any other outside training that the officers go through at the department 6 times a year, 6 different weeks of in-service training, and all the SROs will be expected to attend that training also.
Does that timeline
Yeah.
work for you guys? Like, how's that timeline for you and what you have to do to be
I-
prepared for?
It would be easier if you moved on it sooner, but we can make August 1st work. We already know who we're going to hire, who we've interviewed. All the candidates are local. They live within the school district. They all have kids in the school district. So they're not going to be commuting here. They don't have to move here. So we can make August 1st work.
So if I may, based on future conversations, we may need a meeting before August 1st. And if that happens, this would absolutely be part of it. And if we felt between Chief Katie, Nancy communicating, if you felt that we needed that before August 1st, please let us know and we'll make that happen.
Okay. Yep, I'll talk to all the candidates and make sure there's not an issue, and we'll go from there.
So last time, just to piggyback off Tom, when we're looking at total costs, Nancy, so how much last year with the sheriff's department versus the 4 officers?
So last year, we paid the sheriff's department $126,840, and not including what we paid overtime for the police department. With the new agreement with $70,000, $75,000 each, it's around $300,000 for the 4 officers. Just so that you know, I have $260,000 in that line budgeted in anticipation of. So I would have to transfer approximately $40,000 into that line, including any extras that we may be billed for.
And so to follow up on that, just to be clear, Chief Katie, so as part of this, one of the things originally why we moved to the sheriff is because you were losing money. And as a professional organization, you just couldn't do that, right?
Right.
So I'd imagine that as part of this, you're looking, you can't predict every officer that will be hired and what exactly they're hired at. But is it fair to say that you're looking at the plan being relatively revenue neutral? There's no cost, there's no loss, no benefit.
Right, and the salary we're basing for the full-time officer is a 5-year rate, prior to somebody getting promoted to investigator or sergeant. So, that could change. The amount that we, bill monthly could be less, or it's probably going to fall around the 5-year rate that we gave you. But it's going to be, I doubt that it's ever going to go over the 5-year rate, so it should be close to being revenue neutral.
Any other board members, comments or questions?
I just have a quick question. Whose contract document is this? Who drafted it?
We use the City of Fulton School District's, the agreement they have with the City of Fulton Police Department.
Okay, so I'll ask you a question about it later, because I think there's at least a paragraph missing to it.
Probably. There's been a lot of back and forth with
Yeah.
emails and PDFs. And
So what we're providing them, the administrative content for the board documents that we received, there was part of a paragraph that was not present, and that is being worked on. It will be part of anything.
That was corrected, Jim, in the board docs.
In the board, so it is now correct.
Yes.
But yes, I can answer that for you after.
Anybody else? No? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate your
Appreciate it.
time. All right, so moving on. Matt, my mic's finally working? No?
I got this one, yes, we're getting
Okay, good enough. I'll use my teacher's voice. Okay, next up is the consent agenda. So we have A, the Special Education Board Report of July 18th. We have the Claims Audit Report of May 23rd. Addition to the appointments of school year 23-24. External Auditor, appointment of school year 23-24. And our Board of Education meeting minutes from June 20th, 23. F is Board of Education minutes from July 5th. And G is Board of Education minutes from July 11th. So is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comments? Heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Wonderful. All right, curriculum. Ms. Marie.
Good evening. A is just the New York State textbook law. This is a supplemental text for AP World History as presented.
Is there a motion? Kristen, thank you. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you, David. Any discussion? Heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Personnel, Bob.
Good evening, everyone. The personnel agenda, items A through H, we have administrative staff recommendations, professional staff recommendations, support staff recommendations, and substitute and temporary employees for summer work. So items A through H as presented.
So is there a motion? David, is there a second?
I'll second.
Sean, any discussion? Heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, the next section is items I through N. So in that section, we have extra compensatory positions in all of our school buildings. So it's items I through N as presented.
Okay, I through N, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Is there a second? Julie, any discussion? None, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, the next grouping is O and P. So those are our winter sports coaching recommendations and our spring sport coaching recommendations. So items O and P as presented.
Is there a motion?
Can I actually ask a question real quick?
Um,
I'm just curious, perhaps you can explain it to me. Why are some sports have a paid assistant coach and some sports it's a volunteer assistant coach?
So how about we do this? Let's move it and second it, and that can be part of the discussion.
That's fine.
Yeah, I should have done that. So is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Tom. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Sean. So, Chris's question.
Do you want me to say it again, or are we good?
I'm good. So certain positions, assistant positions are in the budget, and they are filled, and then there are other positions in programs that have volunteer assistants, and that's been the history of the positions in various sports. So it's just what's budgeted from the athletic department from year to year with coaching budgets.
So it doesn't have any, it's not based on needs of that type of sport or anything like that? It's just based off of what we've done in the past?
It's what we've done in the past and what is budgeted. So certainly it seems like there's some sports that have had more volunteers historically, and they are approved as volunteers, and there are others that have paid assistants that are just part of the budget. So certainly that's something that could be looked at.
So, yeah, so how do we get that changed? Because if there's no paid assistant for like baseball and softball,
Right, from
and
consistency
there's multiple
standpoint.
ones for
Yep.
others.
Yep, so that would be under any staffing looking forward in future budgets for sure. So I can share that with the athletic director so she can, bring that as part of a budget moving forward, if that's good with you.
I'm going to take a look at what ones need to be,
Sure.
and I'll,
Okay, yep, absolutely.
I do appreciate that we're bringing this forward this early. This motion to fill these positions for these 2 seasons looking out, I think this is the way it should be.
Any other comments or questions?
And if we could just, as I understand, the way we got to the situation of the people on these lists that are being recommended is that in some cases, positions had multiple applicants, people were interviewed by a committee, and it was determined that the people on this list are the best, in the opinion of the committee formed by the athletic director, to serve in these roles.
That's correct.
Any other comment or question? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries.
And our last one is item Q, extracurricular volunteer recommendations as presented.
Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, David. Any comments? All right, having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions?
I'll abstain.
right, motion carries. All right, next is finance.
A through F are agreements as presented.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries.
G is a budget transfer as presented.
Can I have a motion for G, please?
I'll move it.
Sean, second, please.
I'll second.
Julie, any comments? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries.
H is for a change order for the middle school capital project as presented.
Is there a motion for H?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
I'm having a hard time understanding how we got in the situation where we have to have such significant increases for asbestos abatement. I understand that construction is a moving target, but I also understand from working for many years in asbestos litigation that some of these schools, it was pretty clear there was asbestos in them. So it seems to me that there wasn't appropriate investigation before the bidding and contracts were done so that they contemplated everything. And instead, we're adding all this stuff in later. I mean, I can tell you just from my own personal experience and background, I would have assumed that there was asbestos in the mastic and the flooring. I would have assumed that there was potentially asbestos tile floors. I would have assumed that there was asbestos in the walls at Kingsford or Fitzhugh. So I'm a little concerned that, well, one, they couldn't answer my question about the increases for abatement as opposed to inflation, and also that we just keep ticking up on a budget for asbestos abatement when it's something that could have been discovered if appropriate investigation was done.
Any other discussion? Okay, having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. Two opposed, Kristen and David. All right, we're to one more.
And I is for the independent audit report on purchasing and procurement and the corrective action plan as presented.
Is there a motion?
Move it.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Yep, any discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, we are to items from the board. Do any board members have anything they want to talk about this evening? Yeah, sure.
On his last day here, I think it's appropriate to thank Ryan Lanigan, the principal, previous principal of Oswego High School, for the great work that he did bring to our Oswego City, community. Certainly his engagement. I had the honor to sit on the OHS steering committee and see some of the work along with the whole team that was being done there. And also really appreciate when I sat as president of the Buck Boosters, the great support and understanding that he knew of athletics and the role that they play in our learning community. So I definitely feel like this was a loss for our district. I wish him great luck. And I know that Ryan will always be a Buck, and maybe our paths will cross in the future. But I want to wish him the best of luck, and I know he'll do great.
Any other items?
Yes. I wanted to just bring to the table a conversation about board liaisons for each school. I don't want to claim that this is my idea. It's not my idea. But it is one that I heard in the past over the years that maybe at one time, I don't know if anyone sitting at these tables recall, that each board member was assigned to a school to be kind of the liaison, the face of the board at that particular school. So just something I would like to talk about before the school year starts.
I think that's a great idea.
I agree. I wanted to talk about an email that was received by Oswego High School parents today about a new grade weighting policy at Oswego High School. And the opening paragraph suggests that at least one of the reasons for the new grade weighting policy is a suggestion that students at the top of the class are somehow manipulating their grades by opting for easier courses to ensure that they stay at a high class rank instead of challenging themselves. And it sets forth a new rubric for how they want to weight courses, with 7% for AP, 5% for dual enrollment at a four-year college or university, 3% for dual enrollment at a two-year college and university, and 3% for honors classes. Aside from the fact that I personally was sort of offended by the suggestion that students who are top 25 or, highly ranked in their class are somehow manipulating their high school experience to get the grades, I wanted to talk about the rubric that was created and the impact I think it can have on students who choose to pursue the arts, most specifically band and orchestra. I know from personal experience with a student who was in the wind ensemble, which is considered the honors band group, and was in Jazz A, which is considered the honors jazz group. That's a first period class and a ninth period class, which impacted his ability to take AP classes, dual enrollment classes, to participate in the awesome program that is New Visions. And I'm a little bit concerned that I'm certain it's unintended, but I think that one of the impacts of this new grading rubric is that students who have opted to pursue the arts, like in band or orchestra, are now being put in a position where maybe they need to consider whether or not they want to do that, or if they want to drop that, so that instead they can take AP or dual enrollment classes if class rank is something that's important to them in their high school experience. And I have a real problem with how this happened. I have a problem with why someone has made an arbitrary decision that an AP class is of higher value than being in an honors band or an honors orchestra. And I understand that there was a steering committee that worked with the high school administration. I also understand that prior to this new policy that there wasn't even necessarily a policy in place, but I think that it is giving a distinct advantage to students who are not in band and orchestra, and is putting students who are in band and orchestra at a disadvantage, especially those whose classes fall first period and ninth period, and so therefore cannot take advantage of a lot of opportunities the district offers.
Thank you. As a parent of two high schoolers, I got the email as well. Given that this is not a board policy, this is something that really typically will not fall within board purview, I think it's good that we speak with this a bit in the future with our administrators to try to get a little information, as it seems that you're looking for. So I do think we will be doing that, just not at the moment. Anything else? Any other items from the board? Okay. There is a need for an executive session, so if I can get a motion to move to executive, please.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
There will not be need for a vote afterwards.